Hello, everybody. My name is Jamie Edwards Acton. I am an Episcopal priest in Los Angeles. And again, my partner in crime is,
Here with Francisco Garcia, Episcopal priest, originally from Los Angeles, but now in Nashville.
and welcome to Liberation Lectionary. Here we basically look at the reading. We've been focusing on the gospel of late, and just see if we can't draw out of the passages the good news of liberation, and which we feel like is in much of Scripture. And so we approach the Scripture for the upcoming Sunday with a particular lens. We're looking for the liberation. And this Sunday is the seventh Sunday after Pentecost in year A. And the reading we're in Matthew's Gospel. If you'd like to follow along, we're in Matthew chapter 13. It's broken up, Matthew 13, 24 through 30, and then again 36 through 43. So we're going to read this for you, and then we're going to jump right into it. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect weeds first and bind them into bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the seed and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who has sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun of the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. The gospel of the Lord. All right.
All right.
Well, I'm so happy I got to read this one, so you could start this off, Francisco. Uh, all right, let's jump in and let's
All
see
right.
where this takes us.
This is this one's it's packed with quite a lot of different things, and I think one thing that we were talking about earlier is how we both kind of have trouble with the explanations that come after the parable parable. And
Right.
this one's no different. So I think that we read commentaries, and we look at what biblical scholars are saying and thinking, um, and the way that this thing is explained, you would think that, oh, this is very clear cut. This is breaking down every single piece of the scripture and what everything means and how everything symbolizes something. We're just going to throw that all out the window. So let's just say that
Yes.
when we
Yes.
revisit the scripture from the lens of liberation, we come across all kinds of challenges. One is, how do we deal with issues of judgment, which we know is a theme that comes up a lot in Matthew. What kind of judgment are we really thinking about? Are we talking about, here it's talking about the weeping and gnashing of teeth, and the furnace of fire, and all these things. And um, so I think it's just these are themes that we have to sort of like look at and figure out, what might this mean for us today, when we're talking about the weeds and the wheat. And one thing that comes up for me when I see this, Jamie, is um, how the wheat and the weeds, first of all, are together, right? And Jesus doesn't, in the parable, Jesus kind of says, let both of them grow together for a while in the harvest. Right? At the harvest time, I'll tell the reapers, right? And it isn't until the explanation that there is some kind of analysis, but I'm not sure that I'm satisfied with what is said here. And so I think there's something to be said about the messiness of this scripture and the messiness of life and how we think about wheat and weeds, whether we think about that as sort of people or acts or things like that. I think it just acknowledges the complexity of who we are as people and culture and society, and that we can't just throw any one thing away, but we have to really be present to all of it so we can see how to transform it.
Yeah, and I think in, so setting aside the explanation, I think in Matthew's time, there, in more kind of a general sense, it's clear that there is a kind of there's something like there's a frustration going on in the community, or there's like a despair or something that the kingdom, right? God's kingdom, this kingdom that Jesus proclaimed and embodied and lived out, that this is not becoming fully realized in the way that everybody was hoping, perhaps, and on their timelines, and in the way that they imagined, and I think so. There's a sense of frustration that comes through in this parable, which is understandable because we too get frustrated, right? We today we have these visions of what our societies could be like, right? What public safety could look like instead of just police or something like that. We have these visions, right? And a society of equality and justice and opportunity, and of all that for everyone. But on the one hand, that vision can inspire us. On the other hand, it can frustrate us, and which makes it even more frustrating is this not just growing together, but the how close we are in proximity, and how closely we resemble one another, but have different kind of imaginings for what we could be like in society and what's important, stuff like that. And then what I'm thinking of is we read this from the New Revised Standard Version, but if you go back to the King James Version, which is what the New Revised Standard Version is based on, it's uses that old kind of the wheat and the tares, right? And the
Yeah.
tares is a particular kind of weed. It's not just any weed, but the tare is a weed that looks like wheat. It resembles wheat, and you don't know it's not wheat until it's too late, right? Until you're well into it. So you can't it's never too late, but you don't know that it's not good for you. You don't know that it can harm you, right? And can harm the rest of the harvest until it grows to a certain level. But until that point, it just looks like all of us, right? And that just makes me think about the when we talk about justice work, right, and working for liberation, that it's not just about going out to do that work, right? We have to start in our close to home. We have to start in our families. We have to start in our own heart, in our families, in our churches, in our neighborhoods. That's where the work can really, really get challenging. So,
Yeah, and that's really significant that you mentioned the tares, because it makes me think about, here it says that, right, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of the evil one. And how tempting it is to say, oh, yeah, it's that simple, right? I'm the
yeah,
righteous one, or here, this community, we're the righteous ones, and them over there, they're the enemy, they're the devil, etc. Um, how easy it is to separate and discuss that way. But I think if the tares and the wheat can't really be separated from each other very easily, right? And they're sort of one and the same, and maybe they're sort of intermixed and tangled up in each other's mess, right? Rather than thinking about the wheat and the weeds as different people, could we think of it as these are sort of the complexities within each one of us, that each of us has a choice to make about how we show up in this world, right? And the
yep,
kinds of decisions that we're going to make, and how we are complicit in evil systems of oppression, systems of hatred, that hurt and exclude and trample upon people. And so each of us has wheat and weeds within us, and we have to sort of like do the work to sift through that, right? To unlearn the things that have been toxic for us and for other people, especially
Hmm.
when it has to do with um all all of the divisions that we sort of see right now, um and buying into sort of like certain ways of doing and being things, like whether it's our political system or our economy, right? Thinking that there's that our that the profit seeking motive is going to save us, right? When there are, how many people are unemployed now during this pandemic? I mean,
Lots.
we are beyond levels of what the Great Depression looked like, right?
Right. Right.
People and those who are working, because they have no choice, because they're the quote unquote essential workers, are being treated like crap, right? Whether they're drivers or folks who are working in warehouses, and they're getting COVID, they're at huge risk, and they tend to be working class, immigrant workers of color, low income workers. And so buying into these systems, thinking that we need to have this economy running a certain way, otherwise we're not going to be a good nation, right?
Right.
And how do we sift through that so we can say, where is the true healing? Where's the true justice? Where's the well-being of all? And not condemning that over there, but saying, what have we done to let this happen, right? And what can we
Right.
do differently?
Yeah. Yeah, and you get this sense along kind of just going with that too. You get this sense, like you're talking about, there is this, the kingdom of heaven is compared against this other kingdom. I think in Matthew's time, as I mentioned earlier, that in some way, I'm sure that had a lot to do with the Roman Empire. But if we just pull back a little bit, I think it's these competing visions, right? Of how does God see the world, right? What is important? What is a priority for God? Where does God's heart flow first and foremost? And then, in our country, right? Or the powers that be in their vision of their kingdom, right? And you're talking about that disconnect there. It just makes, what came to mind is how the stock market, people watching the stock market right now as some kind of indicator. And you point out rightly that there's all this unemployment suffering, this first line, low paid workers that are most at risk, and stuff like that. And their situation is getting worse. And just, I can't fathom this ticking up of the stock market, right? At the same time that there's all this suffering, is not a sign. It's not like a sign, oh, we're coming through it. It's just a sign of the disconnect, right? And the difference between those two competing visions. Um,
Right.
I wanted to jump into another piece too, and there's so many great things here now that we're getting going. We're have to be disciplined, Francisco.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'll just say by name, I love this. While everybody was asleep, the enemy came and sowed the weeds, right, among the wheat, or the tares among the wheat. And to me, that connects with this whole concept of being woke, right? Which even sounds a little outdated already, but it's like the concept is still righteous, right? And on the mark, and that we need to be intentional, and we need to be alert, and we need to be awake, and really doing the work, really being actively involved in doing the work, or else this other stuff is going to seep in, right? And not necessarily like it'll just be, yeah, I mean, just this other stuff is going to come in and affect our work, and just because we're unawares, we're not paying attention.
Yeah, and then to continue on that idea, then if we're not paying attention, if we're not aware, if we don't keep our lamps lit and ready, as other scriptures have said, then I think comes the judgment. But what is the judgment? Again,
Right.
is the judgment this sort of like notion that there's going to be a separation of people, and some will be the righteous and some will be thrown into this furnace of hell, of fire, right? That old song, the lake of fire. You
That's
know that
right.
one? Where to? Okay, anyway, I'm not going to say that. We'll do that offline. But
That's right.
the weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, I love the image of the weeping of gnashing of teeth. I think the weeping and the gnashing of teeth, the judgment is the conditions of hell that are created here, because we are not aware, because we are not intentional, because we are letting decisions be made for us by the, the uber powerful, the uber wealthy, and letting, the vast majority of people get swept behind, right?
Yeah.
And the conditions of just the conditions of complete abject disaster, right? Kids in families in cages, COVID numbers rising in our prisons, in our detention centers, you know these things that are happening right now. This is the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. This is the judgment, and it's not any one person, but it's this mix of we and weeds that we're all wrapped up in, that we haven't been able to liberate ourselves from as a culture, as a people, right? And then how
That's
do
right.
we then again show up as individuals and as church and as communities to begin to put a dent, to challenge the way that things have been, and imagine something radically different.
I think, yeah, and I think there's an ironic piece here too, Francisco, of those who see this as, well, God is going to kind of take care of this in the end, right? And so this is a parable to just call, and is for us to just kind of be patient, right? Be patient through the injustice. But I don't see that at all. I see the opposite of that. And like you said, I think it's to do the work now, right? So we don't so all those people suffering that you described and everything, that suffering doesn't just continue while we're waiting, right? It's a call to try to arrest the situation, like to challenge it right now. And what actually I see, it's for me, when I hear like Jesus, he says here about let them, they want to go, out and get the let us pull up the weeds, right? Let us pull up the tares, is what they say. And Jesus says, no, you can't really do that because you're going to do more damage, right? And it makes me think about, we have taught a number of civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience courses together, and we talk about how to use nonviolence to challenge the kind of reflexive kind of feelings in us of wanting to react to those who are creating injustice or inflicting injustice and suffering on others, that we want to pay them back. We want to fight fire with fire, right? We want them to feel what others are feeling. And it's a very tempting thing. Um, but but the way to go about it is not to use their tools, right? The way to go about it is not, to get to where we want to go. We don't use their strategies, their methods, their way of even thinking. And I think about all the principles of nonviolence that we share, when we do these trainings and stuff, that it is it tries to interrupt the kind of almost unconscious cycle, right, of violence that we're perpetuating on one another, and in all kinds of ways, not just in actions, but in our inner communications, in our kind of the way we live and all that. And I see this as like the disciples here. Or those going out and wanting to pull the weeds. That's their reflex, right? They want to go out. Look, there's enough of us. We can go out and take care of them. We can pull these weeds, right? And I resonate with that. But then you have to stop and think that that's probably not going to get us to where we want to go, because you're going to kill the whole crop. And so Jesus, like Jesus always does, is to he acknowledges that those things are there, right? But then what's the alternative way to get to where we want to go, so that we're not just perpetuating the cycle, inflicting more harm than we intended to, and that even maybe there's a possibility to redeem, right? Those who we have named, or we see as the evildoers, or or whatever. Is there a way to even redeem their humanity in the process as well?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that's been one of the critical teachings of the philosophy and practice of nonviolence. Even in, when you go back and read some of Dr. King's early sermons about this, like in the mid 50s, and he's writing about agape and sort of like love, which is kind of like, and then connected it to the idea of soul force, right? He
Right.
studied the teachings of Gandhi and was looking at how we condemn, the call to nonviolence is not passiveness. It's a call to nonviolent resistance to evil, but you condemn unjust systems. You never condemn people, right? You don't condemn humanity. You understand their place in the system and their role in perpetuating injustice, and you call out that, but you don't condemn their personhood, and because that would be, like you said, to use the same strategy as those who are inflicting the violence, who are inflicting the oppression. And so it doesn't mean we don't have righteous anger. It doesn't mean that we don't, that we aren't like out on the street and pushing hard.
Right.
But the work, I think at least from this standpoint looks different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a challenge, right? Because the Gospel of Matthew, you could take it different ways. You could read the scripture and be like, yeah, this means that I'm gonna you know, I'm gonna grab my machete and, have at it.
Right. Or I'm just going to kick back and not
Or
do
I'm just
anything because God's going to
exactly
swoop in and take care of it.
some extremes, right? And no, the
Yeah.
answer is not either of those things. It's actually, let's struggle through this work. Let's choose, right? We do have a choice between the wheat and the weeds, but it's not as easy as pulling them out. We have to work through it. We have to examine our complicity, and we got to find a pathway to liberation that heals wounds and that binds up that which has been, torn apart.
Yeah. I think we should leave it there, Francisco. We suck at keeping it under 15 minutes, but at least we kept it to like 21 minutes today.
Hey, that's
So
not bad.
we're
It's
getting
progress.
better. Hey, it's been a pleasure being with you again this week, Francisco. We're going to try to do this every week, at least the two of us. We may have guests, so hope you'll continue to tune in, like us on our Facebook page, and share this with your friends. And we hope to see you soon. So from Los Angeles,
And from
take care.
Nashville, take care, y'all, and
All right.
seek the path of liberation.
Peace.